All right, so strength training for runners. Let's get into it. Why the heck should we do this thing that takes so much time when we just want to get out there and run? Let's maximize our performance for injury prevention with strength. The elephant in the freaking room when it comes to strength training is that there's so much stuff out there. Literally, you're probably watching this on a social platform, and if you went to the search bar and typed in strength training for runners, there would be about 9 bajillion things that would come up. And it's frustrating as someone who's like, I know that I need to do this, or I think I know I need to do this, or I need to know why I need to do this, and also know what to do. So I'm hoping that today kind of simplifies this for us. The main things that I want to cover is why strength training is so essential, best practices that I have personally found. There's so many different schools of thought out there, but this is one way I want to boil it down, how to make strength work specific to running or even trail running, and then give you guys an example strength plan to kind of get the wheels turning on how you could do this in your own personal life. So, disclaimer for today, nothing is intended to be specific medical advice. Please consult with your physician or doctor before starting any form of physical activity or regular strength training. And as always, if you've been dealing with an injury, I always recommend seeking out a physical therapist. They are going to be the movement experts that are going to help you get back to your peak performance if you're dealing with an injury. So moving on from that, my main goal for this chat today is to decrease running related pains with either like hip stuff, knee stuff, sprained ankles, so on and so forth, really like injury prevention, and be able to enjoy more miles without fear of injury creeping in as you're training for your goals in this year. And who the heck am I and why should you listen to me? So some of you guys might know me from the interwebs as Dr. Sarah the Hip Doc. I am a certified running coach and a doctor of physical therapy who helps women runners with hip pain get back to running with confidence and comfort. I've helped over 70 plus women achieve their running goals over and over and over again. And I also own my practice that is called Legacy Rehab and Performance. I personally have conservatively overcome my own hip injury. I tore my MCL in high school, Achilles injury in grad school, and this year I was actually able to run my first, or last year, 2024, I was able to run my first two 50Ks pain-free, and it was such a freaking blast. Outside of running and physical therapy and businessing, I love spending time with my husband and serving at the kids ministry at my church. The kids are so funny. I literally am like I'm like, where do you guys come up with this stuff? Because they keep me young, they keep me alive. And I've also gotten to present at lots of different things. I've been featured on a lot of different podcasts. I got to speak to the Ohio State University's hip department. I've gotten to speak at lots of local clubs like the Mountaineers, and gyms in the Seattle area, and even REI here in Seattle. And it's just been such a joy to be able to do all of those things. I can put the links for these podcasts in the show notes if you're interested. But I just love being able to speak and present and help y'all. And the main two ways that I help people get back to running with confidence and comfort is in my 6-week running reboot. This is a group coaching program, and then my Empower Hip program is my bread and butter and my baby. It's my one-on-one program. It's either virtual strength coaching, strength and run coaching, or it is in-person physical therapy if you live in Seattle, Washington. All right, and then feel free to stay to the end of this prez because I will give you guys access to a free gift that will be located in the show notes as well. So I kind of want to go for a run with y'all today as we go through this presentation. I made this super corny, but mile one is really going to be best strength practices. So we warmed up in that intro and now we're ready to go for mile one in best strength practices. So the truth about strength training, this is going to be macro level. This is going to be big, like big picture stuff. But really, at the last I checked, the American College of Sports Medicine recommends that we should be resistance training at least 2 non-consecutive days per week just for our general health. So this is really the large recommendation to the adult population in the United States. They want 2 non-consecutive days, so like Monday and Wednesday or Monday and Friday, so your muscles can have time to recover. That's why we want to have 2 consecutive days. And they want us to be lifting the major muscle groups of our body. So we're thinking like the big muscle groups of our upper and lower body and core. That could look like 2 full body days. It could look like an upper body day day, a lower body day, an upper body day, and a lower body day. That might feel overwhelming, but I'll make it nice and simple. And then also I have two articles that I'm referencing here. The PubMed ID is in there, so you can feel free to check them out. The first one, the first number, that 1519, goes to this first stat that muscle mass decreases approximately 3 to 8% per decade after the age of 30, and this rate of decline is higher after the age of 60. So you are a human being that is beyond the age of 30. There is going to be a natural 3 to 8% decrease in your muscle mass if you're not actively putting something into your muscle mass to be able to combat that change. That's why strength training is so important. We can also see in this second chart here, which correlates to the second number in the PubMed ID, there's just different results of aging. Like as we age, we just see these natural changes happening of degradation in our body. We have more bone mass break down and less build up. Our cartilage gets less thick, less tensile, less like robust. Our disc starts to become more hardened, and they kind of lose their ability to weight bear as well. And we can even see in our vasculature that things start to thin and harden and stiffen. Strength training is a really, really great way to increase our bone density, to maintain a robustness in our cartilage, decrease the impact on our cartilage as our muscles can like combat some of the forces, and even put great force through our discs and vasculature to keep them strong and healthy. So from a big, like just macro level, kind of thinking of like if you're like a knowledge logic person, like these are great reasons of why we should be strength training at least 2 days per week. And the key takeaway again is training our 2 days per week of the major muscle groups on non-consecutive days. So you have those days to recover in between. When we're like breaking down our muscle fibers, we want them to have time to rebuild and grow. Okay, so how do we meet strength requirements without spending all day in the gym? We're runners. We do not have time to be doing all of this stuff. We can't be spending like all these days in the gym. So how do we meet these requirements without doing that? My biggest recommendation in just my life and what I found that has worked for me is start with a big compound lift. So compound lifts are multi-joint, multi-muscle strengthening exercises that strengthen more than one muscle group simultaneously. So if you think I need to strength train my big muscle groups 2 days per week, you might think I need to do my quads, I need to do my hamstrings, I need to do my calves, I need to do my core. Those are 4 different exercises I need to be doing 2 days per week to make sure that like my lower body is strength trained. However, if you look at something like a squat or a deadlift or um, like a hip thrust, you're able to train a lot of those muscles simultaneously. So instead of having to do 4, 5, 6 exercises, maybe you're only having to do 2 to 3 in your strength sessions to make this be really efficient and kind of like check that box and move on. So compound lift ideas, some things to get you guys thinking. This is not a comprehensive lift list, but things like deadlifts, which is kind of what this top girl in the top corner is doing. You can think of squats, which this gal on the bottom is doing, hip thrusts, which the girl on the bench is doing, and then lunges, which is what the guy is doing. And these are really getting a lot of those major muscle groups to fire in work, which is awesome. And another huge question that I get is dosage. Now, I really got these dosage principles off of something called the Holton curve. There have been lots of studies done on the Holton curve. And if you follow a different principle, that's great. But this is just kind of what I'm saying for this presentation. Dosage matters. So if we're baking cookies and it calls for, let's see, this recipe calls for how much flour? 3.5 cups of flour, okay? If I only put in a half a cup of flour, those cookies are not going to look as thick and robust as the cookies look in this picture here. They're going to look flat. They're going to have no volume to them. And that's really the same thing when we're thinking of strength training. If we're not doing stuff at a high enough intensity, if we're not doing the correct amount of weight or sets and reps, we're not going to get the intended results that we want. Now, in general, via the Holton curve, when we're thinking of really strength training, we are looking at doing sets of like maybe 3 to 5 sets at 8 to 12 reps, really working at this like 60 to 80% minimum. This is the minimum of our 1 rep max, or 6 to 8 out of 10 intensity. Let me break that down for you. So if I were to, let's say I were to bench press, okay? If I were to bench press or, press weights or whatever, at one time. I could only lift this weight one time because that is how heavy it is. And that's my 1 rep max. I can only lift 90 pounds one time. That's my 1 rep max. I want to be working at like 60 to 80% of that 1 rep max. So I can lift it more than one time, but I could lift it like 8 to 12 times. Okay. That is the dosage that I like to use for people who are maybe newer to weightlifting. This is going to be more of that like hypertrophy weightlifting, which kind of is a fancy way of saying that we're like bulking up the muscles, maybe getting them bigger in size, and then also getting them more efficient for things like being able to run confidently and comfortably. I like starting at this lower intensity, so that 6 to 8 out of 10 intensity at the 8 to 12 rep mark, because it kind of gets us used to weightlifting. It gets us used to the feeling of being fatigued and tired and lifting something kind of heavy, and really able to work on form. Okay. If you're like, I feel really confident in the weight room, everything feels really good, then for maybe advanced weightlifters, I would say maybe you could go to 3 to 5 sets at 3 to 8 reps, working at 7 to 9 out of 10 intensity. Honestly, people can even be going to like 10 out of 10 intensity where you're going to failure. And this is for very advanced weightlifters that feel great with having spotters and know that like there is a chance that you're going to fail at your weight, meaning like if I do that bench press, I'm actually not going to make it all the way up and I'm going to like need help, or I'm going to need to drop the weights, and having a spotter is a great way to like do that safely. For strength training, specifically for runners, there has been some research to show that doing this higher level intensity of strength training is actually more advantageous because we're really working on like the strength aspect of it. So we're working on like the ability of our mind to fire that muscle very quickly, and at a very intense burst. That helps us for running, because if we're stronger, having that strength capacity raise, like that rising tide, is going to raise all of the ships of our strength, of our endurance, of our plyometric ability. And that is just what the research shows. But honestly, if you're like, I have never strength trained before, I've never lifted weights before, starting at that, like starting with something, maybe that lower intensity is going to be, you're going to have way more strength gains than someone that's been strength training for a long time, because there's just more room for your muscles to grow. So that's just a note on dosage. This doesn't have to be hard and fast. Again, working with like a strength coach, working with a physical therapist, would be a great way to kind of get used to this and feel really comfortable with being in the weight room, because ultimately lifting confidently, comfortably, without pain and good form is going to be the best thing for you. Now, to make this a little bit more runner specific for our compound, those big multi-joint, multi-muscle lifts, what we want to start to think of is you can even progress it to single leg. So running, when we're running, we are standing on a single leg, and we're not just standing on a single leg, we're hopping on a single leg over and over again. And a way to make your compound exercises more running specific is to perform them on a single leg. So you could do something like single leg deadlifting, single leg squatting, single leg hip thrusting, so on and so forth. But again, guys, if you're newer to weightlifting, maybe starting with both legs so you could really get the form down is great. Maybe even starting on something like machine so you're able to get that like form down is fine. And then once you're feeling more confident, you can advance to a single leg. However, form and comfort and being able to do it pain-free is always going to trump weight. So if you're lifting 90 pounds in your back squat and then you go to a single leg and you're like, oh, I can lift 90 pounds. Well, I don't think so, because you're going to go on a single leg. So it's probably going to be a little bit harder, but it's fine to just drop that intensity or drop that weight even a lot to get the form down, and then ramp back up as you're working on a single leg. So that's one way to make it running specific. And we're done with mile one. So mile one, done. We've covered best strength practices. The biggest takeaways are going to be lift major muscle groups 2 times per week and start with compound lifts for effective training. This is really going to check that box of meeting what the American College of Science or Sports Medicine wants for us as adults to be maintaining that muscle mass as we age. All right, mile two is going to be how to make your gym days specific to running or even trail running. These are really going to apply to both, but I have a couple different things in here for trail running, and it's just going to be very applicable. So mile two, here we go. Accessory exercises. So In my personal opinion, accessory exercises are where we get to have fun as runners. So, what the heck are accessory exercises? These are exercises for weightlifting in a series. They're for weightlifting that are more focused. They're more focused exercises that complement those primary or those compound motions to improve performance or build muscle. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. So, if I'm a bodybuilder and I am going to my bodybuilding competition in a couple weeks. Maybe I'm gonna do big compound exercises. Like I'm gonna do chest press and I'm gonna do bicep curls. Okay, those are gonna be like my exercises that are gonna work the main big muscle groups. But I'm like, I really want big, robust muscles. So for my accessory exercises, maybe I'm gonna do something like instead of doing a bicep curl where my arms are coming straight into my shoulders, maybe I'm gonna actually turn my arms out to the side and I'm gonna have my arms come out to like at an angle where I'm going to get more of this like kind of medial aspect of my bicep to get more of a pump. Okay, so that is like to build my muscle, I'm going to like kind of target a different part of my muscle to make it be more big and robust because my goal is to go up on stage and flex with all of my tanned whatever and feel really really strong. Okay, but that's not my goal as a runner. I'm not trying to get on stage in my bikini with the tan spray. Like that's just not my goal as a runner. That's fine if it is, but as a runner it's not. My goal is to improve my performance while I am running. So my accessory exercises are going to improve my performance as I'm out there. So you might be like, well, what the heck do we need to do to improve our performance of running? Let's look at the demands of running. So this is not an extensive list, but this is a semi-comprehensive list. The demands of running: we are weight bearing, we are on our feet, so we are loaded in that position. We have repetitive forces going through each joint of our body. Our muscles are having to shock absorb. There's been some crazy studies that have found that every time that our foot makes contact with the ground, there's an equal and opposite. Well, this is just like a law of physics, but every time my foot hits the ground and makes contact with the ground, there's an equal and opposite force that comes up into me that my body needs to absorb. They have found that like ground reaction force can be 2.5 to 3 times my body weight. So every time I land down, there's 2.5 to 3 times my body weight coming back up into me that my body needs to like slurp up and attenuate. Different muscles have been found to kind of absorb that force more than others. So calf muscles can experience up to 8 times body weight in certain phases of the gait cycle. And then we've also found, or this is out of the Ohio State, I think their running lab or the return to run kind of process, but they found that 1/3 of a mile is equal to 200 and 250 single leg hops. So I love this statistic because it's like if I were to tell somebody to go outside and jump up and down on a single leg for 200 and 250 times, they might rethink the way that they're strength training because they're like, dang, this is a lot of impact going into my knee, my ankle, my hip, my back. And then lastly, our muscles are needing to push off and propel us forward to be able to continue running. So to kind of boil this down into a checklist, I'm a person that likes to have it be a little bit more streamlined. And like the list previously is kind of overwhelming. So this is how I made it a little bit less overwhelming for my brain. So checklists to meet the demands of running. I want to be able to have single leg control in all planes of motion. And when I'm saying all planes of motion, I mean like the planes of motion are like moving forwards, moving laterally, and then rotating. Even though as we're running, we are really just moving forward, there is components of like lateral motion and rotary motion that allows us to be able to like propel forward as we're running. We need rotational stability for the core and hips because we are having that consistent rotation as we're running. We want hinge motions. Hinge is like if you think of like squatting or deadlifting, like when you're kind of sticking your booty out, we want hinge motions for activation of our hips to push off and propel us forward. And then we also need plyometrics for both shock absorption, so that like attenuation or that slurping of the force as we land, and then power to push off and go into our next phase of the running cycle. So this is kind of the gross checklist. Again, I don't think this is all encompassing. There's so many nuances, but this is a big picture macro view. And I shared some examples of kind of what that looks like for each of these things. And then let's get into some real examples of these exercises. But before I share, with this list, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Like, I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, holy cow, like 2 minutes ago or 25 minutes ago, I didn't even know I needed strength train. Now I have to meet all these demands of running. No, you don't always have to. Like my number one recommendation is like start with what you need. If you're like, I feel like I am pounding the ground, then maybe you're going to be a person that's going to work on that like attenuation and being able to land better. If you're a person that's like, oh my gosh, my hips feel so weak and like, when I push them out to the side, like maybe you're someone who's going to work on like that lateral hip strength. And then really just throughout the year you can kind of cycle through the requirements. There's so many plans and programs that are really really great for runners specifically, that incorporate different types of strength training that kind of meet all of those requirements, so that you don't have to think about it, but as you're training throughout the year and as you're like going through your pits and valleys of strength training, you're kind of getting what you need to be able to like move forward, and train all those things. So here are some examples that kind of meet that checklist. Single leg control exercises in all planes of motion. So single leg squat, this is a great one where you're just imagining instead of being on both legs, you're on one. That's really training us in this like forward plane of motion. This kind of like lateral squat that this gal is doing, she could maybe be reaching onto a Bosu if she needs a little bit more ankle stability, or she's kind of doing like a lateral slider lunge here. That really works that those lateral hip leg motions. And then a hip airplane is kind of like if you're standing on one leg and you like kind of hinge and create like a T with your body, you're like rotating your body over that T, and that's really working like the outer hip into rotation. It works the hip into rotation to improve the control and stability of the hip into rotation. So those are some examples of single leg control exercises. Rotational stability exercises might be like this banded abdominal rotation that this person is doing, like grabbing a band or a cable. We're really working a lot of those core musculatures. Maybe we're like in a plank position with some dumbbells and we're like rowing one at a time. As I'm rowing one, my body wants to like continue to like fall and go that way, but I'm actually having to stabilize on the opposite sides to keep me nice and stable and, facing the ground. And then maybe lastly, I'm doing like a deadlift, and instead of just going straight down towards the floor, maybe I'm having like some rotational component with that deadlift, to just increase rotational stability through my hip and low back. Okay, hinge motions. This is really awesome. Like I think a lot of people are like, my glutes aren't turning on. I'm a glute amnesiac. My PT told me that my glutes don't work. Like, okay, that is maybe true. Like maybe your glutes aren't recruiting as fast as you want them, but if you're running, your glutes are for sure on. Like maybe they're not on as much as you want them to be. And like specifically working on that hinge motion, you could see this girl in this like kind of top left-hand picture here as she's doing like that deadlift. She's really working on that hinge motion. And these are worked on with exercises like squats, deadlifts, or even like glute bridges. And what I really will say is something that's awesome about these hinge motions is like they're largely found in our compound exercises. So squats, deadlifts, and glute bridges. And you can kind of check this box with those compound exercises that you're doing to meet those 2 days of big compound exercises. So you're meeting the ACSM guidelines. However, I will say, if this is something that you're struggling with, maybe you're like, I really feel my left glute, but I can't feel my right glute because I have X, Y, or Z, then this is something that you could work on in your accessory exercises, maybe with less load and kind of just practice going through that hinge motion. Maybe you're doing something like a single leg squat and you're pausing at the bottom and you're like really feeling it in your right glute to kind of up train that, make it feel like you're really able to like feel it more. And then when you go out to run, you're like, oh, I kind of feel this carryover and I'm feeling better as I'm out there kind of doing my thing. So hinge motions are awesome because they can be trained in the compound exercises. If you feel like you need more attention on them, this is something that you could work on in your accessory exercises to make sure that you're feeling symmetrical and awesome into your glutes, on both sides. Lastly, what we want to work on for runners is plyometrics. So I like to think of plyometrics in two different ways, either like the attenuation of the force or like the ability to absorb the landing well, and then also that push-off phase. So being able to push and propel into your next step. Some examples are skater hops, like this gal's doing here. She's hopping from side to side. She can work on that landing as she goes to one side, and then she can work on that push-off as she goes to the other side. Another exercise I really love for a lot of my athletes is the single leg forward hop and stop. stop. So maybe instead of going side to side, they're going forward. So they're hopping onto their right foot, pausing, hopping onto their left foot, pausing. I like this one because it really forces people to work on that like attenuation of the force and have a really soft landing. And that stop, when they have to stop, they're like having to hold everything, which really sets them up for being able to like control and stabilize well over a single leg. And then when they go to running, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better because my muscles have been able to turn on at fast speeds, which really like does them well as they are, having to hop on a foot over and over and over again for a long time because maybe they're running for a long time. And then another exercise I love is pogo hops, like if they're on a single leg and they're just kind of like jumping up and down on one foot, kind of at a quick manner. This is really great for people who maybe are like, uh, feeling like they don't have that spring. Like this is a nice way that I'll kind of train that like that spring for people to feel more bouncy and elastic as they're moving forward, and we can make it more challenging or less challenging. And again, we just always want it to be pain-free and comfortable as they're going through that. So, dosage for accessory work is also very important. Again, like if this recipe calls for 1 cup of butter and I only put, 1 ounce or like an eighth cup of butter in, the recipe isn't going to be as, you're probably going to be really dry, and you're like, well, I don't want dry cookies. And then in the same way, you're like, I don't want my stability or my endurance to be off when I'm running. So we really want our accessory work to be dosed well. And still based off the Holton curve. The Holton curve teaches you how to dose power and yeah, muscle power at the top, teaches you how to do strength next, and then endurance. And then we could do kind of like just muscle recruitment, and then like vascularity, which is kind of like a fancy way of saying like a muscle pump or just kind of creating good motion into the muscles. We really want to look at the goal of what our accessory work is. So if our goal of the accessory work is to increase stability, maybe it's increasing endurance, maybe it's increasing recruitment, then the dosage is going to be different. So if I'm trying to increase recruitment, so maybe someone is like, I don't feel like my right glute turns on, and I'm having them do that single leg squat where they're pausing at the bottom. Maybe I'm going to have them do a lot of that. Maybe I'm going to have them do like 25 reps of that. So they're really getting that high stimulus into their brain to be like, this is what it feels like for your glute to turn on. Versus if someone's trying to work on stability, so maybe they're working on like that hip airplane, or maybe they're working on like a that plank row where they're trying to like increase the stability into their core. Well, maybe I'm having them do a little bit more weight, and I'm having them do like 15 to 20 reps, and having them have a higher intensity, so they're actually able to like get more of their stabilizers to kind of be challenged and fatigued towards the end. So it is kind of a sliding scale, but in general, we're looking at lower intensity or lower intensity. So like maybe 4 to 6 out of 10 intensity. RPE is rate of perceived effort or rate of perceived exertion, and then 3 by 15 to 25 reps. Again, like the dosage, honestly is super important. Like I think it's honestly the most important thing because I don't like dry cookies, and I want my cookies to, have the best ingredients. In the same way, I want my exercises to be dosed for the correct intent. And really the best way to know how much you should be doing is, you can follow the Holton curve, or you could work with like a strength coach, or again, a physical therapist that really knows dosage. And like if your intent is for something specific, like they can really help you walk through what the best dosage is to meet your goals. Okay, so mile 2, that was it, y'all. How to make gym days specific to running or trail running. And programming should really meet the demands of running. And again, if you're like, I don't know what to do, a PT or a strength coach can really tailor your accessory work to meet your unique challenges, which I just think is the coolest thing ever. All right, mile 3, y'all. Here we go. So example strength plan. Maybe you're like, this is too confusing. This is just gonna help you kind of put it together. So we are going to use me as the example because that's easy and great. So I am Sarah. I run 3 to 4 days per week. This is actually true. I have a history of a hip labral tear and an ankle sprain on the labral torn side. I really struggle with poor rotational control through my hip, and also have really poor ankle stability on that ankle sprained side. I would say I'm very confident in the gym, so I'm an intermediate to advanced weightlifter, and I just really enjoy weightlifting. So my lifting plan example would be 1 to 2 times per week. I would probably aim for 2 times per week, but depending on how much I'm running and how busy I am and all the things, maybe I'm only getting to it once. My compound lifts are going to include back squatting. I'm going to do 3 to 5 reps at 7 to 9 out of 10 RPE. And then same thing for the deadlift. Typically when I'm lifting my compound lifts, I will start with a warm up and then, which is typically like just really light back squatting. Like maybe I'll do like just the bar. For me, that's light, and then maybe just the bar for the deadlift and just kind of get those patterns warmed up and feel really good. And then I will progress. So I'll start at maybe like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 intensity, and then I will work up to that 9 out of 10 intensity throughout the lifts. And I will be doing 3 to 5 sets. So 3 to 5 sets at 3 to 5 reps at 7 to 9 out of 10 rate of perceived effort. And then moving into my accessory lifts, because I am weak into that rotational stability, I'm going to do the hip airplane. I'm going to do the plank with the row because that's going to work on like my core kind of rotational control. And then I'm going to do a forward hop landing onto a Bosu. If you guys seen like a Bosu, it's like the blue kind of half ball with the black on the bottom. I'll land onto the blue side, and that's going to help with my ankle stability because I've been known to sprain my ankle on the trails or on the roads, and I don't want that. So, does this meet the guidelines? Let us see. So, single leg control in all planes of motion. The only exercises I'm working on a single leg is the hip airplane and the forward hop onto onto Bosu. The hip airplane is working in that like kind of rotational plane of motion, which actually does get all the planes of motion really targeted. So honestly, this kind of does check that box. Rotational stability for core and hips. I'm working on rotational stability in the hip airplane and the plank with row. Hinge motion for hip activation and push-off strength. My back squat and my deadlift are working onto those hinge motions. And the hip airplane actually also puts me into the hinge motion as well. And then plyometrics for shock absorption and power. The forward hop onto the Bosu is working on my plyometric like shock absorption, not necessarily for power. So that is actually something that I'm not meeting in my kind of weekly strength plan this go around. So maybe next time I change my plan, that is something that I could focus on for the next cycle. And this does meet the ACSM guidelines because I'm training at least my lower body 2 times per week, and I would benefit from putting some upper body stuff in there for sure. Okay, so mile 3 example, strength plan. We did it. Now let's cool down and hydrate. Did anyone feel like mile 3 was like way easier than mile 1 and mile 2? Maybe that was just me. Okay, so recap and encouragement. If you're reading this or listening to this and you're like, holy freaking cow, she gave me a lot of information. What the heck do I do? Like, just start with the compound lifts. Like, that really is what we want to meet those guidelines as a healthy adult. You're going to have huge benefits if you have not been strength training with weight. You're going to have huge benefits because it's like your body's going to go from like kind of nothing to something. Like you're going to actually have, it's going to be like you're baking with flour, you know, like instead of baking with, it's going to be like you were always baking those cookies with half cup of flour, and now you're baking it with the full 3.5 cups of flour. Like the cookies are just going to taste so much better because there's just so much room for improvement, and there's going to be really, really awesome gains into your running because you're going to have like more strong and robust muscles. You're going to feel probably stronger on your runs, and it's probably just going to feel a lot easier because as we train strength, the rising tide of training strength is really going to lift all the ships beneath it. So endurance, stability, all of the above. If you're feeling overwhelmed with the accessory lift portion, just think like, what am I struggling with the most? Like maybe like people are sometimes aware of their bodies and they're like, I have a sprained ankle. Okay, let's work on ankle control. I know I have weak, glute medius. Let's work on glute med strength. I've never trained in rotational plane of motion. Okay, maybe I'm gonna do the hip airplane. And if you're like, Sarah, I have no idea what you're talking about. I really need help with my strength training and just strategy for running, feel free to look in the show notes and you can easily book a call with me at strategywithsarah.com. I would be more than happy to chat, or you can also just leave a comment on this video and I will answer it for you. And to the best of my ability. Finally, places to start, the free gifts that I was talking about. I do have a free strength guide called Run Strong. The dosages are pretty high, so they're actually all 3 by 20. Feel free to make it fit to kind of like your needs and your your ability level. But I love the strength guide because it does train in all three planes of motion, and you can see there's three different options for most exercises. There's three different options if it needs that many, but there are modifications is the word that I'm looking for. So if you don't have a barbell, if you don't have dumbbells, you can grab a heavy bag of rice and do the same exercise. So this is just really great for kind of inspiration of like, okay, what are some exercises that I could do that are strength training? That would be really great for me as a runner. Lastly, if you are like, I know I need more of a guided approach and I just want to consistently have access to it, you can check out my hip strength series or my hip stability series in the Empowered Runners Club. It will be in a link in the show notes. And there's a 2-week free trial. So you can bop in there. If you love it, you could stay. If you don't like it, you can leave. And that is all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the link below, or in the comment section, and all this information will be available to you in the show notes. Captions. Thanks. I'll talk to you guys later.